Hello and welcome to episode 112 of Linux Dev Time. I'm Joe.
I'm Amalith.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Andy.
Good to talk to you all again. A couple of episodes ago, we did your development hot takes, and I had a lot of fun listening to it, editing it, listening back to it. So I thought, right, let's do another round of that. So who's going to go first? Amalith, tell us one of your hot takes.
My first hot take is maybe a bit of a downer regarding the climate. I'm sure there's a dry joke with hot take and climate. I'll let you guys figure that out. Maybe the software engineering industry is actively furthering the destruction of our planet, and maybe we should start taking measures to reduce our impact where feasible. That is my hot take. It should be a pretty cold take.
We might have mentioned this on a previous episode where by using compiled languages, you have better climate. So stop using so much JavaScript.
Can I have a hot take on that hot take, which is all that kind of stuff that Kevin just said is totally irrelevant. The amount of CPU your code takes is not the issue. The issue is all of the piles and piles of slop that is happening on the internet that's just not needed. We just don't need to run all this stuff. We've got data centers, melting the earth that are just, running AI or serving up videos in 4K of cats. Why?
Don't go after the cat videos, but there are a lot of videos on YouTube that are sitting on servers running 24/7 that no one will ever watch. And we talked about this on Linux After Dark a year or so ago, and I kind of tried to coin the term digital waste. And I think there is an awful lot of digital waste out there, like auto-generated videos and podcasts and stuff like that, that just sit on servers and never get viewed and never will do, and will just sit there and get backed up and go from server to server and just use loads of unnecessary energy.
I'm really saying it to myself, Kevin. I'm not trying to attack you, but the tempting thing for me is to think, oh, what cool programming thing can I do to save the planet? And it's nothing. Just stop doing all of this stupid stuff we don't need.
Stop making cat videos.
I do have maybe something positive to say in this area. It is difficult to work towards fixing a problem if you can't measure anything about it. And until somewhat recently, there haven't really been any tools for measuring the energy use of particular pieces of software across various platforms. A friend of mine, Chris Walden, made a tool called Wattwiser, Watt with 2 T's, -wiser. And it allows you to measure, graph, and benchmark the energy use of software. And you can even do things like run your software in benchmark mode. It runs your piece of software, collects all of its metrics, and then you can tell it to rerun that same piece of software, collect metrics after you've made some sort of change, and then compare the two and show you how your changes in code impacted the energy use of that piece of software. And it's really cool to run on various applications and see how they impact your energy use. Games are insane.
It's a very cool distraction, like I said before. It's just so much more worthwhile to get a solar panel, run as much power as you like, because you're not using up any resources to do it.
Sure, but that's not going to happen for a long time. And everyone relies on the power grid. People in their homes, administrative offices, buildings, everyone everywhere in a modern society. And yes, having solar panels everywhere would be great, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I think something that we can do to materially improve things is to try and make sure the software we're developing that runs on hundreds, thousands, millions of computers, that runs in these data centers, is using as little energy as it can. Not only because, yes, that saves the planet, but also because fewer CPU cycles is less energy, is less money you have to pay. It's just more cost effective too.
Yeah, and your battery lasts longer on your laptop or your phone or whatever. Yeah, there's every reason to do it, even if the motivation is a little bit starry-eyed, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's an additional benefit as well. You whether or not your actual change to code makes any, measurable difference, I think just the fact that that could bring some awareness, right? It brings awareness that you are generating some kind of energy use, right? The same thing with some of the GitHub actions that'll show you what your energy use is for your CI. Making tweaks to your CI to bring that number down, I think in the grand scheme of things, kind of like Andy is saying, doesn't really impact it that much. However, seeing those graphs, seeing those bars, seeing those numbers do keep that in the front of your mind. You can bring awareness to other engineers. I think the idea of seeing that stuff is more valuable than actually bringing the numbers down on the small scale, if that makes any sense.
I totally get what you're saying, and I think you're right. And if your software is running on millions of people's machines or running in a data center a lot of times, then there's a real impact from that. Yeah, I totally get the idea that we're all in this together and we should do what we can. But I also think we can be really distracted from the companies and things that are really destroying the planet by thinking, oh, well, if I do my little bit, then, especially if it's a fun bit, like optimizing code, which is the most fun that you can have on a computer.
Oh, just wait till I get to my hot take.
Let's have it then.
My hot take is you shouldn't optimize your code. Let me expand. So in development, people do say things like, oh, don't prematurely optimize. And that's effectively what I mean, but I'm taking it a step further to be even more inflammatory to say, don't optimize your code at all, because 99% of the time you're going to be wrong. I agree. It is a very fun thing to do. Code golfing is great. Optimization is great. However, I think 99% of the time, the compiler is going to do a much better job than you will. And you're going to effectively just waste time for fun.
There's even profiling guided compiler optimizations that you can use with Go.
Optimizing is hard, right? To do it for real. And there are times, all seriousness, you do need to optimize your code and you do need to optimize certain things. But it's very, very hard to do. And it's very fickle with the compiler and the things that you're trying to do. So a lot of times, the things that you're trying to do to bring your memory usage down or whatever don't actually help that much. Turns out compilers are usually very, very smart. Now, there are some edge cases where that's not the case and you do need to optimize by hand. But my point is, people will optimize and be like, oh, I'm not going to premature optimize. I'm just going to do a little bit here because I know that this is going to be slow. I'm going to remove this branch. Guess what? Branch predictors are incredible and will probably make that branch basically free anyways, especially if it's in some kind of a loop where the branch predictor is basically 100% right. You're doing a lot of work to the code for not a lot of gain and potentially even making the code harder to read, harder to understand.
That sounds to me like you're saying don't micro-optimize. Don't optimize a function.
Yeah, because I guess that's the part that I see most often, on the day-to-days, when people are writing them oh, I want to remove this branch so I can get rid of a branch in this code path. Or I want to not clone some particular section of memory because that's going to be super expensive. When actual memory allocation on the grander scheme of things, when you're not in these super, super tight loops, is probably not even going to show up in any kind of benchmark.
Yeah, blissing a big chunk of memory is not actually that bad, because you're not going to do it that often. Yeah, I would say don't optimize without measuring.
Absolutely. That's, I think, the second part of this hot take is if you were to make this a less inflammatory, it would be don't optimize unless you have a reason or proof that you need to.
So I spent 6 happy months of my life trying to make a C++ program work faster because our goal, our business goal was it needs to be not so awful and slow. And so my job was to optimize for that time. But it wasn't knowing about how the CPU works and writing the loop a different way. It was, we have 3 string types, and all our program does is copy bytes between one string type and another string type and another string type, a massive blob of XML. So if I could somehow just not do that, then it would go faster.
Sometimes I think logical optimization makes a bigger difference as well. When you look at it, you're like, oh, we're actually loading this file 4 times when we only need to load it once and save it. What if I just remove those other 3 times? Some of that sort of stuff is where you'll get these massive gains that the user's wow, super snappy now. I like this.
But those are also the harder ones to see.
Yeah, and it's all about measuring.
There's a pretty cool, I don't know if it's a paradigm or something, but I've heard you push your ifs up and your fors down. And the whole idea is to move all of your branches up the call stack so that you eventually have kind of this one massive kind of branching statement, but you can see all of these branches at once and you can determine oh, these ones are dead or I don't need these ones or whatever. You can re-optimize that part of it. But then if you push your fors down, eventually you just end up with these straight line functions or extremely tight loops with no branches inside. So that's sort of this other style of optimization that I think actually could be cool and should be used more often.
I often think it's about the data, right? So my example before was really dumb, right? Just like we're copying strings from A to B. But generally, the structure of the data can be the kind of thing that causes user pain type slowness, right? And if you change the structure of the data, the code will probably fall out all right.
Oh yeah, data-oriented programming is becoming, I think it's having a resurgence, and it's very cool. Compilers like Zig that have fully embraced that and use that internally. You can see some massive performance gains by thinking about the data layout.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by 1Password. Imagine your company's security like the quad of a college campus. There are nice brick paths between the buildings. Those are company-owned devices, IT-approved apps, and managed employee identities. And then there are the paths people actually use, the shortcuts worn through the grass that are the actual straightest line from point A to B. Those are unmanaged devices, shadow IT apps, and non-employee identities like contractors. Most security tools only work on those happy brick paths, but a lot of security problems take place on the shortcuts. 1Password Extended Access Management is the first security solution that brings all these unmanaged devices, apps, and identities under your control. It ensures that every user credential is strong and protected, every device is known and healthy, and every app is visible. 1Password Extended Access Management solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. It's security for the way we work today, and it's now generally available to companies with Okta and Microsoft Entra, and in beta for Google Workspace customers. So support the show and check it out at onepassword.com/LinuxDevTime. That's onepassword.com/LinuxDevTime. Quick bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to linuxdevtime.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed that includes either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And you also get quite a lot of episodes a day or so early. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can email show@linuxdevtime.com. All right, Andy, give us one off your massive list.
Licenses matter. So young people today don't know that they're born. They think that you just chuck your code on the internet and everything is basically free to use, and it doesn't really matter what license it's under. And what happens is someone comes along, exploits your stuff, makes a ton of money out of it, doesn't share it with you, or in some way doesn't comply with your wishes, and you wish that you had licensed it properly. Even stupid examples like my YouTube videos have been re-uploaded by people who put adverts in them and, well, no, just like do the YouTube adverts in them, monetize the thing, and then it's just my videos. And my license allows them to do that. And so, I mean, in that case, I'm just going to live with it. But that could be really hurtful, and I would have wished I'd thought about the license more if that was going to be a problem for me. The two licenses you can choose on YouTube are proprietary or CC BY. So CC BY means they have to like credit me, but in a sense, because it's me on the video, that kind of maybe counts as crediting me. Anyway, I complained to YouTube and YouTube said they're CC BY, so they can do what they like, which is fair enough. That's the license I chose, and that's actually what I'm happy with when it comes down to it. It's slightly annoying to me that someone is putting adverts on my videos, but people are still watching my videos, so it's all right.
I wonder if that's due to some of the defaults where I think GitHub might default to MIT license. I can't remember, but I wonder if it just has to do with something like that. Like people start a project, they don't really think about it like, whatever, MIT license and good to go, move on. Especially if they're not necessarily planning on their project picking up any steam. Like maybe it's just started as a little internal thing to solve their own itch. And eventually it does grow into a thing. And then they go, oh, maybe I should have relicensed this, or maybe I want to change it. And kind of by that time, I won't say it's too late, but that's, I think, how a lot of people end up in that situation.
Yeah, and it matters. It matters that you build your community around the trust that they can have in the code. So licenses are not the only thing that build that trust, but they are an important component.
I wonder if we just need new ways to teach licensing, or if licensing should even really be taught when you go, to college for computer science or something. And if there are just better ways to teach that, because I don't remember learning much about licenses short of just what I've, self-learned on the internet or just being a part of the Linux and open source community.
Well, isn't the default just proprietary? Like, it's just assumed that all your code is going to be proprietary when they teach you it.
Right, exactly. And I think part of what Andy is saying is like people just, for lack of a better term, like just don't know any better or don't really think far enough in advance to know like, oh, what are the differences here? Why should I care? Why does it matter to me? And there absolutely are reasons why.
Is it possible that for a lot of young people, the concept of a license is like the concept of a file system? It's just not something that has ever entered their mind.
Possibly. We were very briefly taught about licenses during a college seminar course, but it wasn't mentioned during software engineering or any of our other courses. It was just one day in seminar for maybe half an hour or something. And it wasn't until I did a 20-minute presentation just on licenses that my classmates started actually understanding what licenses were, when they should use them, and how the licenses dictate they should use pieces of software in their classes.
So if anyone's listening to this, they don't care, they don't know what license to use, it's okay. Use the AGPL version 3. That is the one that prevents people from exploiting your stuff unless they're going to make it open as well. So just use that.
There's also writefreesoftware.org, and they do have a pretty good human-readable summary of each of the licenses and when you might want to use each.
Yeah, so really what I'm saying is you should care, and you should go read that. But if you don't care, use the AGPL version 3, you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think, though, like maybe it's just poor business practice, but if you're going to stand up a company or an entity around a project or whatever it is, I would think there's a step somewhere in that guide, somewhere along the way where you think like, all right, let's think about the legal ramifications. While we're thinking about all the other legal things we have to think about when we're building a company, what are the legal ramifications of the license that is actively on this project? And should we change that to meet with our better business practices? Because I think a lot of people or a lot of companies, unfortunately, like to push the open source thing because they know that's how they're going to get a lot of traction, get a lot of people, get a lot of eyeballs and a lot of downloads. And then that's when, we get into this whole rug pull situation of like, oh yeah, never mind. We actually don't want Amazon taking our product and just selling it, ahead of us.
I'm obviously in hot take mode, so I'm like being extreme. There's lots of good reasons to choose highly permissive licenses. For example, if you want companies to cooperate and you actually want them to have the option of building proprietary software based on this shared resource, which is your code, then yeah, go for a permissive license. But if you're just chucking it on the internet because you think you want to show off that you made this thing, think about a proper license.
All right, Emeleth, let's have another one from you.
All right. So discussions about Jabber and Matrix often pit them against each other. And I think that does everyone in both communities a gross disservice, because our goal should not be one or the other winning. Our goal should be open, federated, privacy-preserving systems winning over centralized proprietary crap. Ideally, it should be Matrix and Jabber instead of Telegram, instead of Messenger, and so on.
Instead of bloody Discord.
Mm-hmm.
Preach it.
Are you describing bridges between them?
Not necessarily. Bridges kind of universally suck. And I actually had a thought on this. It's a somewhat well-known, adage to build protocols instead of platforms. If bridges are platforms, maybe something like MLS is a protocol. I think Matrix people are actively collaborating on MLS. And I know some Jabber people have looked at MLS and put it on their to-do list for looking at and evaluating a bit later on. But maybe that's an area where both communities can find some common ground and interoperate. And then I can chat with Matrix people for my Jabber server.
That's a really good point, yeah. MLS is a way of doing group messaging, like encrypting group messaging in a kind of standards-based way. Mm-hmm. And it's a nice standard, and the Matrix people have done some work on it. I don't know much about it. It currently doesn't fit with the way Matrix works, is that it's not distributed. It has like a centralized thing. So that's a perfect example of what you're talking about. We should work together as a community to get a standard that does fit with the way we think about the world, and that would be awesome. So yeah, you're so right. I very much hope that the Matrix community does have that attitude.
Who knew that Major League Soccer was the answer? Let's have another one from you then, Kevin.
So this one is security is a myth. You're going to get it wrong. from a software engineering point of view. Now, I don't necessarily mean like encryption. Encryption's real. Encryption's hard. Let the cryptographers do their thing. Mm-hmm. What I mean is, if you want to build secure software, you basically can't. All things are against you, and you're going to get something wrong somewhere. Sorry.
Well, that's depressing.
That sounds to me very similar to this idea that software is never finished.
You're obviously right, Kevin, but I do think Joe's right that it's the same point as it's impossible to write bug-free software. Right? The thing about security is it has to be bug-free to be secure, and no one's ever written bug-free software.
I think part of it too is like the higher you get in the stack, and here high may not mean JavaScript. High could mean low-level C code in this case. It turns out things just like zeroing memory can be very difficult because the compiler and the CPU and the cache lines and all these things can be lying to you the entire time, where you think you zeroed out that memory. No, sorry, it's still there.
Yeah. And sometimes some stuff will just be able to be done automatically for us. And I think we've had some iterations of technologies that tried to just make all that stuff go away and do it for you. And maybe that was too leaky an abstraction, and maybe we're better off with things that give you the power to handle that stuff yourself without it being too difficult. Maybe it's better.
Yeah, maybe it's just in the style of abstractions that we have, because even things, file system permissions and OS level permissions, like there's all kinds of things that build up this whole like security apparatus around the software that we build. And I think we're just early enough in the industry that we just don't have those good abstractions yet. We don't have those good layers that can kind of handle some of that stuff for us, because a human probably just can't keep all that in their head at once.
We do have some stuff, right? We have processes that don't run as root. Right. And that basically works.
Oh, we're making progress for sure. But then someone finds out how to make that program that's not running as root overwrite some weird part of memory that makes it root all of a sudden, and now everything's gone again.
I was really scared by those timing-based attacks where the branch predictor behaves differently when different things happen, so you can figure out what's in memory with a bit of memory you're not allowed to see. That's just like, if someone can do that, I don't understand how we can protect against anything.
Especially when those types of attacks can work across VM boundaries. So like imagine you're running a workload on a VM in AWS somewhere, and you run that, and now you get secrets out of a neighbor VM on the same machine. Like that kind of stuff is terrifying. So I think as we start to build better abstractions and better layers in there, like some of the stuff will get solved, and yeah, it may never be done, but there are some really cool advances in the industry. And even new things too, like I want to say there's something called AMD SegV or Intel SGX. Like there are these different things where you can encrypt memory and have it encrypted from, almost like an enclave that other programs or other users of that memory cannot see. So there's a lot of stuff that's still to be done. We're just very, very early still in this industry.
But in a world where if your mic's open, someone can listen to your password, I feel like there's always going to be things that we're not going to be able to account for.
Absolutely.
Let's have one last one from you then, Andy.
Okay, self-hosting is hard. Maybe shared servers were a good idea. I wish I ran my own Mastodon server. I wish I ran my own Matrix server. And I don't, because they would be down most of the time, and I wouldn't be able to interact with my friends and my colleagues. And I'm glad that I'm using a server that someone else is running.
I think you're just saying sometimes you should leave it to the experts.
I'm saying you should never leave it to Andy.
Collectives of people who run shared hosts like this do exist. They maybe have a few servers and share access between them. If something goes down on one, multiple people might be able to get in and bring it back up. They often contribute to a pot of money that gets divvied out between them, that kind of stuff. They do exist. I can't think of any off the top of my head, though. They are great.
But even in those situations, one of those people should not be Andy, correct?
That is correct. I'll do some other part of the community. Like Chaos Computer Club in Germany is the best example of people who are totally on top of this stuff and get it, and it's so cool. I'm not quite sure how the PeerTube server that I use, infosec.exchange, is run. I think it's basically one individual running that, but it's run on donations, and that's also a Mastodon server.
I love the thought of self-hosting. I love it.
Yeah.
I just don't have the time or the energy to do it. And I think, like Andy said, it would just end up broken at some point, and my wife would yell at me.
Right. Well, we better get out of here then. As ever, do send us your hot takes. show@linuxdevtime.com. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. But until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Amalith.
I've been Kevin.
And I've been Andy.
See you later.